never expected to be seated at table 19, back by the service doors near the clinking of dropped silverware and the hum of an ice machine. But that's exactly where they put me. No +1, no nameplate with brother of the groom, just plain old Caleb, tucked in the shadows while everyone else basked in the spotlight of my younger brother's big day. The reception hall glowed with crystal chandeliers and floral centerpieces, so tall you had to dodge around them to make eye contact. Wait staff in tuxedos floated past with champagne flutes and bite-sized hors d'oeuvres. I sat with people I barely recognized, some co-workers of the groom, a college roommate maybe, not a single family member, not even a wave from my parents. Evan, the groom, stood by the head table looking like a GQ cover model. Crisp tux, polished smile, charm dripping like the imported wine he was sipping. Our parents beamed beside him like they'd just won the genetic lottery. I raised my glass, mostly out of habit, and thought about slipping out the back before the speeches started. After all, no one would notice. But just as I grabbed my coat and turned toward the exit, the DJ's voice echoed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? The bride would like to begin the evening with a few words." And then she said my name. Everything stopped, and I had no idea what was about to unfold. Growing up in the Morgan household meant living under a microscope, especially if your last name wasn't Evan. Our parents, Dana and Robert, were both high-powered attorneys in Denver, obsessed with perfection and appearances. Evan, their youngest, was their pride. Ivy League education, dual degrees, tech startup founder by 28. Every family Christmas letter read like a tribute to his brilliance. Me, I was Caleb, the older brother, the what happened there in every conversation. I went to community college, worked night shifts at the fire department, and eventually became a paramedic. I saved lives, quietly, without fanfare, and without the kind of accolades that meant anything to our parents. It wasn't always so distant. As kids, Evan and I built blanket forts, traded baseball cards, and stayed up whispering secrets on Christmas Eve. But the older we got, the more our lives split down different tracks. While I was taking EMT classes, Evan was winning pitch competitions in Silicon Valley. At family dinners, any story I told was met with polite smiles and quick redirects. "That's great, Caleb. Evan, tell us more about that investor meeting." When I brought home commendations for pulling 2 children from a burning duplex, it barely earned a nod. My mother once referred to my job as a phase. And my father, always uncomfortable with emotion, deflected with legal metaphors. Over time, I stopped sharing, stopped trying. It hurt, but it was easier than watching them light up only when Evan walked in. I wasn't bitter, at least, that's what I told myself. I had friends who respected me, patients who remembered my name. But when that wedding invite came, just Caleb Morgan, no guest, no role, I felt every buried wound rip open. I wasn't just overlooked anymore. I was erased. And deep down, part of me wondered if that would ever change. The Horizon Country Club looked like a Pinterest board had come to life. White roses everywhere, golden string lights draped across the ceiling. A string quartet playing something elegant I couldn't name. Guests strolled in wearing tailored suits and designer gowns, greeting each other with warm familiarity. And me? I stood out, not because of what I wore, but because of where they put me. Table 19 was in the far corner, nearly behind the catering station. One of the servers even apologized as she squeezed past me with a tray of shrimp skewers. "Sorry," she whispered. "You shouldn't be seated this close to the kitchen." I gave her a small smile, but the truth was, I shouldn't have been seated there at all. I scanned the room. My parents were front and center, laughing with Evan's future in-laws. My name hadn't even come up in the toast so far, not once. When I tried to wave to my mom, she gave a distracted nod, like she was acknowledging a passing coworker at a networking event, not her oldest son. My father didn't even look up. I might as well have been invisible. As the evening unfolded, I listened to people around me share stories about Evan, the genius entrepreneur, the generous friend, the golden son. Someone even joked, "That guy's basically perfect." They didn't know I was his brother. I hadn't been introduced to anyone. They thought I was maybe a distant cousin or a childhood friend invited out of obligation. My name card read Caleb, nothing more. I sipped my flat soda and scrolled my phone, pretending not to care, pretending it didn't sting. But it did. Every minute felt like another reminder that I didn't belong in this world of success, money, and curated image, that I was a glitch in the family portrait they were trying to paint. I glanced at the door. Maybe I should leave. No one would notice. I could make it home before midnight, order a burger, and try to forget the way this night had twisted a knife in everything I'd tried to ignore. Then the DJ's voice boomed through the speakers, catching me mid-thought. "Ladies and gentlemen, the bride would like to begin the speeches." And suddenly, every eye turned forward. So did mine, because I heard my name. The moment she said my name, my mind snapped back to that night on Route 46. It was late March. Snow still clung to the shoulders of the highway, melting just enough to make the roads slick. I was the lead paramedic on call when the radio crackled with the report. A sedan had flipped off the road and landed in a ravine. I remember climbing down through the brush with a flashlight and gear bag, the cold air burning my lung. When I reached the car, I found a woman unconscious, blood running down her forehead, airbags deployed, no ID. No clue who she was, just a mangled vehicle, smoke in the air, and a race against the clock. We stabilized her airway, got her out, and rushed her to Mercy General. I rode in the back, holding pressure on a head wound while monitoring vitals. She came to once, eyes fluttering open for just a second. I told her she was safe, that we had her. She squeezed my hand before blacking out again. It stuck with me, that fragile human moment, where pain and trust exist side by side. But once we dropped her off, I moved on. That's what we do. There's always another call, another life hanging in the balance. I never told anyone about it. Not my crew, not my family. It wasn't some heroic story. I was just doing my job. The job they'd always seen as a phase or not real healthcare. But that woman was Charlotte. And I had no idea she'd one day be Evan's bride. So when she said my name into that microphone, something shifted. She knew. And suddenly, the life I'd lived in the shadows, quiet, thankless, invisible, was standing under the brightest lights in the room. Charlotte stood poised at the mic, her elegant white gown catching the chandelier's soft glow, but her voice was what froze the room. Not in nerves, but with weight. "Before we dive into all the happy stories tonight," she began, her eyes scanning the crowd, "there's something important I need to say. Someone I need to thank." The murmurs quieted. Champagne flutes paused mid-air. She took a breath and then said, "Caleb Morgan." My heart jolted. I felt hundreds of heads turned toward me. A few guests shifted to see who she was talking about. Me, the man tucked by the kitchen doors, a ghost in his own brother's celebration. "You all probably know me as Evan's wife," she continued. "But before I ever met him, I was just a woman driving back from a client pitch in Silver Lake, exhausted, distracted. It was raining, and I swerved too late on a sharp turn. My car flipped, went down into a ravine, and that night, someone saved me." The hall was completely silent now. I woke up in the hospital with broken ribs, a concussion, and no memory of who rescued me. But months later, through a twist of fate and a conversation with Evan, I realized it was Caleb. His crew took the call. He pulled me from that car, and he never said a word. Not to me, not to Evan, not to anyone. She looked directly at me now. That's what humility looks like. That's what quiet heroism is. While the rest of us were busy climbing ladders and collecting titles, Caleb was out, saving lives, mine included. I felt my throat tighten. Charlotte raised her glass. So tonight, before we toast to love and success and all the usual things, I want to toast to something rarer. Integrity, selflessness, the kind of man who deserves far more than a seat at the back table. The applause started slow but grew quickly. People stood, strangers, friends, even Evan. I didn't know where to look. My face burned. But for the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I was seen. And it was because she told the truth. As the applause echoed around the ballroom, I stood frozen. My napkin slid off my lap and onto the floor, but I didn't move to pick it up. I couldn't. My legs felt locked, like I was suddenly occupying a different gravity. The sound of clapping, of genuine, sustained recognition, was something I hadn't heard in a room full of my family in over a decade. I scanned the sea of faces and landed on my mother. Dana Morgan, polished and unshakable, had her champagne glass halfway to her lips, but her hand was trembling. Her eyes didn't meet mine. My father, Robert, stood beside her like someone had just unplugged his battery. He didn't clap. He didn't sit. He just stared at me as if trying to match this version of me, the one being publicly honored, to the quiet disappointment he'd mentally filed away years ago. Charlotte gestured toward the head table. "Caleb, would you come up here?" she said softly, and somehow I did. I rose slowly, like I was walking through water. Guests parted along my path, murmuring, smiling. A few touched my shoulder as I passed. I hadn't expected kindness from this crowd, but there it was, rippling in ways I never could have predicted. When I reached the head table, Charlotte didn't hesitate. She pulled me into a hug, tight, real. "Thank you," she whispered. "You gave me this life." Evan stood next to her, his expression unreadable. But then, without saying a word, he reached for me too. For a second our hands hovered in mid-air, brothers unsure how to bridge the canyon. Then he pulled me in. Heard him whisper, "Why didn't you tell me?" I didn't answer. Not yet. My mother still hadn't moved. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, like someone had told her gravity wasn't real after all. My father finally sat, shoulders hunched. And as I stood beside the bride and groom, champagne in hand, I realized something was shifting. Not just in them, but in me. For once, the shame wasn't mine to carry. Let them feel it. Let them sit in the silence they used to leave me in. Because tonight, I was no one's secret. I was finally undeniable. Later that night, after the speeches and the dancing had softened into background hum, Evan found me outside on the terrace. The air was cool, the kind that presses lightly against your skin without demanding attention. He stood beside me, hands in his pockets, tie loosened, hair tousled from a night of shaking hands and making memories. For a moment we just stood there, two brothers watching the moonlight ripple across the club's man-made lake. Then he spoke. "I really didn't know," he said quietly, not looking at me. "About Charlotte. About what you did. Any of it." I nodded, not because I forgave him, but because I believed him. He glanced over. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I took a slow breath, eyes still on the water. Would it have made a difference back then? Evan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked down, ashamed. "I don't know. Maybe not. But it should have." I finally looked at him. "You always had them on your side. I didn't need another person acting like I didn't matter. I didn't tell you because I wasn't trying to win anyone's approval. I was just doing my job." He nodded slowly. "I've spent so long being the center of their world. I never saw who was holding it together behind the scenes." We stood in silence again, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable anymore. Eventually, Evan said, "I want to fix this. I know it won't happen overnight, but can we try?" I looked at him, not the polished startup star, but the kid I used to share bunk beds and baseball cards with. And for the first time in a long time, I said, "Yeah, we can try." After Evan walked back inside, I stayed out on the terrace alone, hands resting on the cool iron railing as I stared up at the stars. The applause, the speech, even Evan's hug, they all felt like echoes now, fading into the night. What lingered was something deeper, a quiet ache that had lived inside me for years, now finally rising to the surface. I thought about every moment I'd buried. The night I graduated from the paramedic academy and sat by the phone waiting for a call that never came. The time I saved a child from cardiac arrest at a school field trip and read about it in the paper, only for my mother to call and ask if Evan was still seeing that venture capitalist girl. Every family dinner where I was spoken around instead of spoken to. It was never just about being ignored. It was about being erased. I thought I'd learn to live with it. Told myself I didn't need their approval, didn't crave their praise. But tonight proved I'd been lying to myself. Because the second Charlotte spoke my name into that microphone, something cracked. And in that crack, light poured in. Recognition, respect, truth. Things I had long ago convinced myself I would never receive from them. And maybe I still wouldn't, not fully. But as I stood there, finally breathing in the air of a night that didn't belong to Evan alone, I realized something important. I didn't need to be the golden son. I didn't need their pride in order to feel proud of the life I'd built. I had given people hope. I had saved lives. And finally, I had started to reclaim my own. Just as I was about to head back inside, the terrace door creaked open again. This time, it was Charlotte. She slipped out quietly, holding 2 glasses of wine, her veil now tucked behind one shoulder. "Thought you might need something stronger than sparkling water," she said, offering one to me with a soft smile. I took it, and for a moment, we just leaned against the railing like old friends, instead of in-laws who barely knew each other. "I meant what I said tonight," she added, her voice low but certain. "You saved me. Not just from that wreck, but from a life I might have rushed into without ever understanding what real strength looks like." I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. Then Evan appeared behind her, hesitant at first. "Mind if we join you?" he asked, as if we weren't already family. He sat beside me, eyes earnest. "We've got a lot to fix," he said. "But I don't want this to be the peak. I want this to be the start." To my surprise, our dad stepped out moments later. His presence didn't come with pomp or apology, just silence. And then, quietly, he said, "I saw the footage. That rescue. It was you, wasn't it?" I nodded. He looked down, then up again, this time with something unfamiliar in his eyes. Remorse. "I was wrong, Caleb. I've been wrong for a long time. It wasn't a perfect moment. No grand reunion, but it was a beginning, a real one. And that night, under the string lights and soft music, I didn't feel like a guest in someone else's family anymore. I felt like I had finally been invited home." 1 month later, I pulled into the driveway of Evan and Charlotte's new home, an artsy craftsman tucked into the foothills just outside Boulder. The backyard was buzzing with laughter, the grill sizzling, and kids running around with sparklers as dusk settled in. I stepped out of my truck, carrying a pan of mac and cheese, unsure if I was early or late. But the moment Charlotte saw me, she lit up like I was the guest of honor. "There he is," she called out, waving me over. "Come meet everyone." Inside, framed on the mantel, was a photo I hadn't expected to see. Charlotte in her wedding dress, Evan beside her, and me, off to the side, mid-laugh, caught in a candid moment that looked real, not staged, not a token gesture. A moment where I finally fit. Evan pulled me aside as the evening wound down. "You've always been part of this, Caleb," he said, handing me a beer. "We just didn't deserve you until now." Later that night, as I stood on their deck watching fireflies blink across the yard, Charlotte joined me. "You know what I realized?" she said. You're the story we'll tell our kids one day when they ask what courage looks like. And maybe she was right. Not because I wore a uniform, but because I kept showing up, even when no one saw me. Now finally they did, and I was ready to start the next chapter, this time as myself, fully seen, fully here. This story reminds us that quiet strength often goes unnoticed until the moment it can no longer be denied. Caleb spent years being overlooked by his family, his achievements minimized simply because they didn't come with prestige or power. But true value isn't measured in titles or applause. It's measured in impact, integrity, and the lives we touch when no one's watching. When the bride finally revealed the truth about who saved her life, the illusion of who mattered in the family shattered. Caleb didn't need a spotlight. He was the light. And sometimes it takes a single moment of recognition to undo a lifetime of silence. This story is for everyone who's ever felt unseen, unappreciated, or pushed to the side. It's a reminder, your worth isn't defined by the seat they give you at the table. It's defined by who you are when no one's looking. If this story moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs that reminder. We bring you real, emotional stories every week that prove character will always outshine status. Your support helps us keep telling them. Hit that bell so you don't miss the next one. You belong here.